Now, after the 2023 presidential election and the subsequent legal challenges to the result, many Nigerians say that this country's democracy has been battered. They say there's been a decline in respect for political rights and civil liberties, and that Nigeria is today still facing an acute political crisis. As such, they wouldn't hold Nigeria up as a beacon of democracy in Africa. So, in order to guard against a further slide, reforms are needed urgently, and it should fall on the shoulders of the current administration to lead the charge to sanitize the electoral process and restore what one public commentator called the dignity of Nigeria's democracy. But does the administration actually think that the electoral process needs sanitizing? And if so, how far should it go in disinfecting it? What types of reforms are needed? Well, for this, I'm joined now in the studio by the program lead at the respected think tank, the Center for Democracy and Development, Armsfree Ajanaku. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Some have argued that Nigeria experienced a net decline in democracy following the 2023 presidential election, based on the very credible research that is associated with the Center for Democracy and Development. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, to some extent, we agree. And when you look at the data, what the data is telling us, and some of the very deep-seated issues that played out in the elections, you can't but agree that Nigeria's democracy actually suffered some serious issues. For instance, when you look at it from the point of view of participation, which is what should ordinarily drive a democracy, the fact that you have the vast majority of the electorate being a part of the process, coming out confidently to exercise their franchise. You saw that, we didn't really tick off that box in terms of, but there were also outcomes in the elections which actually suggested that we made progress in some areas. We saw, lots of incumbents or powerful politicians losing their positions. As a matter of fact, there were several governors who couldn't make it to the National Assembly, and probably used the place as a retirement home from being away from the governorship. So it has been a patchy, a patchy situation with respect to our democracy. And if you now look at the downside. While the people who won the victory have marched on and have, tried to give a narrative that all is well, we all have a collective responsibility to remind, the people who are now in power, who have the power to do something about the weaknesses and the gaps in the process, for them to take the required action to reset our democracy and, in the words of that analyst, really give it the respectability it deserves, right, especially as we are also trying to project, the image of the democracy champions in West Africa and in
the giant of Africa. That's also the giant of democracy.
Absolutely.
So, what are the broad categories that you look at that would tell you whether Nigeria has advanced or regressed with regard to democracy? I mean, I would imagine you mentioned representation, participation, the rule of law. I suppose civil liberties would all be high up there.
Yes, absolutely. It's a combination of all you have mentioned. But more importantly, at the Center for Democracy and Development, we always make a statement that our role as activists, our role as active citizens, is not just to agonize, but also to organize. And part of that organizing is really taking a deep look at what the issues are. We believe, for example, that necessarily a critical part of the democratic process is that democracy must deliver development. Professor Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, talked about democracy being about, or development being about, removing the unfreedoms of poverty, ignorance, the unfreedoms of tyranny, oppression. So we also believe very much in that kind of analysis that the democracy must do that. But for the democracy to do that, it is also critical that we get the leadership recruitment process right, and which is why the very early steps we are seeing from the Tinubu administration, really call for concern, because if you look at the nomination of the resident electoral commissioners that we have seen so far, there have already emerged certain concerns in terms of having partisan characters that are being nominated to play the role of the electoral umpire, and this is even as the Constitution itself makes it clear that partisanship, or people who belong to political parties and they have shown partisan inclinations should not be nominated. It should be non-partisan people.
Absolutely.
And so this is one source of concern, which we believe that we should be very, very proactive in getting the president and his team to listen, because the 2023 elections has come with a lot of baggage, and you need to start addressing that baggage, and you have to address it from a pedestal of saying that, okay, we want to turn a new leaf. We hear the voices that have spoken against our election. Yes, we have won in court, but the legal victory is not the same thing as the victory of legitimacy.
Absolutely.
So we are in that space of saying that, okay, we have to now start doing the right things, ensure that there's a proper scrutiny of anyone who's going to be appointed, as either a resident electoral commissioner, a national commissioner, so that you strengthen the institution, which is the election management body, and put it in the right pedestal to deliver free, fair, and credible elections in Nigeria.
And it's interesting that the president was, of course, a pro-democracy activist who then transmogrified into a politician. I mean, does that give you hope that the things that Nigerians have been clamoring for, the things you're talking about, including electoral reform, political, economic, and fiscal reform, would now be on the front burner, or you're not confident at all so far?
Yes, so if we look at the history of, people in that mode of, pro-democracy activism, who held on to certain ideals before they got into government, and then got into government and, never really cared about those ideals. It's not an encouraging point to look at it. But we are hopeful, because we don't want to be pessimistic. We don't want to be, we don't want the confidence of Nigerians in democracy to be depressed, because we also see what is happening in the sub-region. Nigeria, in spite of its limitation, has been serving as a bulwark, protecting democracy and championing democracy in spite of its own internal contradictions. And we have, made it clear that part of our role is to ensure that we put the pressure on, these people who, especially when they held those ideals, they made those ideas to be everywhere. Because the point I made earlier on about those who actually had those ideals and they got into government has to do with an issue like restructuring. We saw a lot of advocates of restructuring who said all Nigeria needed was to restructure and to devolve powers, and suddenly they found themselves in power, and they never
we never heard anything.
They never felt it was important to talk about restructuring. So I feel, we feel at the Center for Democracy and Development that we have to play our part in reminding, we have to play our part in that memory building to say, this is what you stood for. As a matter of fact, President Tinubu himself was a beneficiary of people power when in 2003, the former president launched an onslaught on the Southwest to capture all of those states in the Southwest. Lagos State remained one of the states that was not captured, in quotes, because people stood behind him. He was able to mobilize the people and use the power of the people. And in the countdown to the off-cycle elections, for example, I saw where the National Security Advisor, for instance, was saying that the administration will not interfere in the electoral process. Those are signs we should be cautiously optimistic about. But we should now also push them to go the whole hog in terms of the reforms, the comprehensive reforms in the electoral process that would give the power back to Nigerians that their vote counts.
Okay, well, you must come back and talk to us some more about those reforms. But I want to thank you very much indeed. Some of the things you said are very, very important there. Armsfree Ajanaku is the program lead at the respected think tank, the Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you very much.